Because it has like a 9-point plan, like a checklist of here's how you come up with a thing that needs changed. Here's how you figure out what changes to make and that kind of thing.
How newspapers define and implement innovation. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today, we're highlighting a piece by Damian Radcliffe over at What's New in Publishing about the ways various media organizations approach making innovations in their workflow and technology. The article, What Do We Mean by Innovation? And Why is Implementing It So Darned Hard for News Organizations? Discusses interviews conducted with 10 experts across the media landscape about their philosophies towards innovating within the industry. The experts discuss the lessons they've learned from successes and failures as well as gave advice about the biggest barriers to implementing change. The pace of change in our industry means that even the biggest, most successful companies need to continually innovate, refresh and reinvent what they do and how they do it, said Damian Radcliffe. Here are a few of our big takeaways. When trying to innovate, make sure to keep your goal in mind. Are you trying to improve the way you gather news, how you package it, or the way it's distributed and monetized? Before pursuing an innovation, make sure that both your newsroom and your audience are ready for it. You should also make sure you have both the staffing and fiscal resources to pursue it. Remember that innovation doesn't have to be flashy. A new CMS might not be as exciting as a website redesign, but if it helps your workflow, it might be more beneficial. No matter what changes you make, it's important to keep things fresh and constantly reevaluate both your paper's technology and processes to avoid becoming stagnant. Because of this, Our Hometown designed our WordPress platform so that new features and design elements can quickly and easily be added as papers assess their needs.
They're not really too specific in this, but as I listened to it the second time, I thought of a bunch of great examples of innovations that are out there that people aren't maybe taking advantage of, and why aren't they doing that? I think it's just a question we have to constantly be asking ourselves as providers of a platform. Let's look at this first point here. When trying to innovate, keep the goal in mind. I do think they make a lot of good points here about just how to look at it and not get caught up in the wrong things. You don't do something just for the sake of doing it. There's got to be like a real clear time saving or something. So like improving the way you gather news, for example. Reverse publishing would be the first thing that comes to my mind on that. Just in terms of that's a big time savings. It makes you more digital centric. It allows you to be daily. It allows you to check all these goals that we're constantly talking about. The minimum in the digital age. Even for a weekly newspaper, it needs to be daily.
Yep. Email to post would be another one.
Exactly. So the goal being getting stories up on the web as quickly as possible and as easy as possible. Google Docs add-on, reverse publishing just kind of sets up the whole workflow for this. It doesn't specifically, get the stories out there quicker, but it just sets you up for that. How to package it, also video and audio content. The goal being getting people content in the format that they prefer to consume it.
I would also add newsletters to that list, which is a thing I think a lot of people are still overlooking somehow.
Take advantage of every option: email, Facebook, print, online, video, just hit them all.
Yes, let's talk about this though, because it's like the innovation doesn't have to be flashy. So you don't want to just necessarily be on TikTok because it's the latest app. We want to think about where the audience is and what is the most sustainable thing. Like email newsletters is just repurposing articles that are on the website into an email. That's clearly something that you would want to do. Facebook, only if it can be automated. I mean, really, if you're manually posting Facebook links, the cost benefit analysis, it depends on the size of your audience on Facebook. I couldn't say across the board that's a good idea, but I would say yes, across the board, an automated publishing solution from the website to Facebook is a good idea. I subscribe to the News and Review and I tested this theory for myself. And on my personal news feed, we're putting out a dozen articles on Tuesday. I'm only seeing one article every 30 stories or something. They really do space it out on the personal news feed. There's really no reason not just put it all out there as soon as possible. And for many of our full service customers, that's when we extract the PDF and put all the stories up in HTML.
Also go a little broader regarding the platform. You don't have to redesign your website for there to be a benefit to switching to like a WordPress platform where you can do everything in one backend. Just because your website looks fine doesn't mean that your backend can't be improved, and that might be more beneficial.
Right. And many providers, including our hometown, could just take any template that you give us and basically mock it up on WordPress. You got to look at the whole picture. The website is one piece of the puzzle, and it could be part of the print workflow puzzle, but it's definitely central to digital, obviously. I think those are some real tangible take-home points for small publishers. Some people, I think, kind of jumped into just doing video right away because everyone was doing video. They didn't really have a goal in mind, and they didn't have a strategy behind it. And so those things kind of fall off quickly. But you look at like Pleasanton Express, they're pretty consistent about it. It seems to be that their goal is to just cover like all sports. There, it makes sense to invest your newsroom resources into that.
I love that second point. Before pursuing an innovation, make sure both your newsroom and your audience are ready for it. I would also add to that, don't underestimate your newsroom and your audience, because they may be more ready than you realize.
This is good. Yes. Thank you for bringing us back to this. How could a local newspaper find this out? Talking to your newsroom is one thing. Let's focus on the audience. How could they find out if an audience is ready for a podcast? What are some specific things they could do? I have a couple ideas. I'm thinking like a poll, just run a poll on the website.
How about focus groups?
That would be definitely the next level, and you'd get a lot more out of that. I think that we want to come up with a whole list of things. Like that's the most involved. But yeah, that's something that could be done virtually probably. So Kevin Slim talks about that, right, Vera? That's his big thing. I don't know right now.
Right.
I think they would give the attendees something. What would that actually look like? They would like give them lunch or something and come in and look at the paper and ask them a questionnaire about it, basically.
That's right. And any suggestions and improvements that they would make.
So that you could knock off a ton of stuff with a survey like this. You could ask about podcasting, interest in video, interest in more category specific newsletters, all kinds of stuff. What's the simplest way to get started? If you're thinking about doing a podcast, run a poll on your website or maybe run a newsletter and just see if you can get some feedback that way.
Right. And I think the poll shouldn't be something that says, if we offered a podcast, would you listen to it? It should be something that's more like, how often do you listen to podcasts?
That's right. They're probably more honest. I mean, it's asking about what they do now, not about what might
current
do.
Behavior, current interests.
And past behavior is the best predictor of future. So you would I think you can even be more specific. How many hours have you listened to a podcast in the last month? I recently took a survey to try to get into a beta test for a New York Times audio app, and they were asking me this exact type of stuff. If there's some way we could ask these questions of people.
Right, and even ask your newsroom.
Ask the newsroom. Absolutely. I just had this cool idea though.
How often does your staff listen to podcasts? When do they listen to podcasts?
They're going to be more newsy than the average person. We got to keep that in mind. We kind of talked about that a few weeks ago.
Right. But it's also an indicator of whether or not they're ready for.
Just trying to assess the adoption of podcasts in your community. Yes. And you could ask them much more detailed questions. Right. Thanks for watching Today in News Tech, the podcast covering innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At our hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact Us button.